Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Identity Library. My name is Veronica Becher, and today I'm joined by Abdullah Najjar, who's now looking at me because he just makes me laugh all the time.
I promise to look away.
We started recording this episode and we failed already twice. It's okay. Let's just
We'll just take it for what it is.
Do you want to introduce yourself maybe to the audience, everyone who doesn't know you yet?
Yeah, no, of course. So I am, in addition to being Veronica's co-host, and in addition to hosting my own podcast, I'm a student here at NC State University, and I'm in a master's program pursuing a degree in international studies. And I am from Libya. And that is, for those who are geographically challenged, that's in North Africa.
This is bad. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, some people don't know it, and some people have never met a person from Libya.
I've noticed that. No, even with Germany, like, I just had recently a conversation with this girl who asked me what German is and what Germany is, and I was like,
oh, that's shocking.
You didn't know that? Well, she's younger though, so it's okay. It's okay.
But these people have never heard of Germany?
No.
That's incredible.
She wasn't even sure that there is a different country that is like across the globe.
Okay.
Culture.
Now, we're not talking about geographically challenged people here. We're talking about perhaps American-y challenged people. I just coined that term. When you're so immersed in a particular culture, maybe just one, this happens to be America, and you're just completely unaware of what exists outside of America or where you're from. It's very rare. I've never seen a case like that before.
Not knowing where Germany is?
Not knowing where anything is.
I think the craziest thing that so far that I've heard was Germany, that we speak Spanish in Germany. There's some other things that are also crazy, like going for, like when I lived in South Dakota, I had like the weirdest experiences in high school. Okay, high school kids are a little bit crazy too, but basically one of the guys came up to me and asked me if we ride horses because we don't have actual streets and we're just living in the wilderness. And I was like, what about most, like, Mercedes and Porsche and all the other,
all the big cars, the cars.
Yes, cars, automotive. Like, I think right now, half of the population would have just, I don't know what they would do to this kid, but basically, yeah.
Oh my God. I thought we were the ones, Middle Easterns or Arabs. I thought we were the ones who would be considered the people who ride camels. Because I get that a lot. Like at one point, we got to know this person, my friends and I. We were here in the U.S. and we were just we were actually having fun with that person because that person thought that we rode camels back home, and we decided to go with that joke. And I told that person with my friends, we were around that person, and I told my friends, I really miss my camel. I left my camel behind.
Oh my gosh, no!
I can't believe I left my camel behind.
Are we allowed to use a joke that you told me today?
Yes, it depends on the joke though.
The one with how to call Muslim people.
Oh, yes, please do that. Well, I mean, okay. I think some people, I'm sure people would not be offended. I'm not offended by it. But, we've got to put a disclaimer here.
We should put the disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. I'm sorry. Today we just talk about random things that might offend people. Please don't take it too hard.
It's unfiltered.
It's unfiltered. Oh, new podcast name.
There we go. We're getting creative.
Okay.
What's the joke?
You can tell the joke.
Oh,
you're the one. It's your joke.
Oh, it's my joke. Okay, so the funniest thing is I was creating a paper for one of my students, and
Life of a TA.
Exactly.
You know when you have these memes on Instagram, what's like the funniest answers that kids write to like some really random questions you get in elementary school? Yes, that's
I experienced that almost on a daily basis grading papers, or on a weekly basis, that is. But anyways, in one of these papers I was grading, this person did not know how to refer to people who subscribe to the Islamic religion. And so instead of referring to them as Muslims, she would, or he, I should probably not disclose the pronoun of the person, but it's already out there. The person said, instead of saying Muslims, they said Islams. And they kept referring to Muslims throughout the essay as Islams. And it doesn't end there. I remember sending this to some of my friends who come from the region, the Arab world, and one of them said, and I sent that picture, screenshot, and he said, "Welcome to Islamland." And another one was like taking it too far. He said stuff that I probably won't reveal here. But we have a sense of humor.
Basically,
Muslims have a sense of humor.
Basically, if you ever want to visit his country, welcome to Islamland, where people are Islams living there.
You don't find any Muslims, only Islams.
Yes, and you don't use cars, right?
We just use camels.
Yes, you're in the desert.
So prepare yourself, exactly. Oh my god.
You are basically the desert.
We are the desert. No, here's another funny thing. Another funny story that's also taking it too far. I remember when I shaved my hair off and I grew my beard out. I sent the picture to one of my friends who lives in the region, by the way, Middle East, and he's like, "Damn boy, you're coming to kill us? Kill some Arabs?" He thought I was like special forces guy.
Oh no.
And I was like, okay, this beard is scaring people. I'm removing it.
This is why you always wear your newsboy's hat. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to scare people off. I don't want to give an impression that I'm killing them.
No, I think like one of the biggest misconceptions that I've encountered was the whole German background history and how people so perceive our regime and how we live still in Germany. It's a little bit a sensitive topic, let's say it this way. But apparently I encountered some people that were not aware that we are out of this regime, let's go this way. And some people assume that, a really well-known person, is my neighbor. And for anyone who doesn't know who I'm talking about, I don't know, I'm just gonna drop it, that Hitler is my neighbor or my cousin. And it was like me just going through those like whole year living in South Dakota and getting the most absurd comments about how Hitler is my neighbor, my cousin, and do I even visit him on daily basis all the time? And I was like, are you joking or were you serious about that? Because as a joke, okay, I can live with that, but if you're serious, I'll be concerned. I'll be at a different level concerned till I think our English teacher stopped these kids of asking me these questions because they were really
That's rough.
No, it is actually not as rough because Germans surprisingly understand humor. We're actually good with this type of humor. I think the issue is when you have a misconception later on and you actually are serious about these things. If it's a joke, it's okay. If it's something serious, accusing you of like being, in a certain regime, it's complicated. But
yeah, no, I think even intra-group jokes are sometimes, there are certain jokes that are not frowned upon when it's in between the group itself. But when you stretch out and people start, thinking that they can say certain things without offending you, I think that becomes a problem. Because I can share that, I can joke with my friends about, like, similar to the jokes that I was mentioning earlier.
Islamland.
Like, we could probably joke about these things because we are already, we've known each other for a while and we share pretty much like similar identities, so it wouldn't be misconstrued, that joke, if I were to say it, or if my friend would make that joke. But if someone from outside of that group makes a joke about the group, then it sort of becomes a problem because you don't know what their intentions are and you don't know where they're coming from.
And if they actually are serious about it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree. It is an issue. And sometimes when people don't laugh and you don't know their sarcasm yet, you sometimes also question if they're serious. It's a little bit problematic. So, But I also realized living in the United States changed my sense of humor a lot too. Because sometimes we played the other day, we had some students from Germany over here through Fulbright, and we were playing Cards Against Humanity. If you heard of this game.
We
Yeah.
I think we played it.
Yeah,
3
exactly.
weeks ago.
Yeah.
Actually, they're your birthday.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And basically, I realized that the sense of humor that I have nowadays is so different than the German humor that is like 100% German, unless I switch completely into my German personality.
Identity library.
Yes, exactly. So what happened there was just that this girl found it really funny that like the cutest answers would actually be the funniest answers. And I was like, Americans would never choose the cute answer in Cards Against Humanity. We would always choose, for some reason, the one that is just inappropriate.
Right.
In
that's
any
the purpose
kind of way.
The game, right?
Yeah. But then she was like, that's adorable. I want to pick this one. And it was kind of funny in the moment, but looking back, I was like, that's a different sense of humor that I never gonna understand completely.
Yeah, but it changed. I mean, the culture certainly changes, tweaks your behavior a little bit. You have to adjust it to a certain extent. But I think you were mentioning something earlier before we started recording about how you wouldn't want to wipe, or rather discard your entire identity or disavow of your identity simply to want to assimilate. Like you want to cling on to some of your values and some of the things that you consider to be, core components of who you are, in spite of the fact that you're in a culture that's pretty much very different. Like you do want to cling on to certain things that make up the person that you are. And that's, I think you made an interesting point earlier of wanting to not necessarily shed everything about you in order to assimilate. You want to be who you are, but at the same time, you can still find a way to adjust or tweak certain things about yourself to not necessarily alienate people. Right? I mean,
yeah, it was just a context of like, an epiphany about culture differences and how your closest relationships affect you, and just realizing that sometimes when you try to adjust to a different culture, what happens is you end up adjusting so much that you almost put a mask on your face and disregard your own values, or you have to sometimes disregard your values. Because, just a simple example, Germans are more direct. We approach criticism. Let's go. We're good.
We're all good.
And feedback completely different than Americans do. We seek it out actively. It's almost expected that you're gonna get bad, feedback, because people want you to improve. But the way we give feedback is really direct, so we can offend someone by saying that the way we do. But it has also some positive sides to it, and there's a reason why we do the way we do it. So when you switch countries, you realize that you can't just stick with these values and be direct all the time. It can be helpful because you can resolve conflicts much easier. I think you can address things faster, and you don't beat around the bush. You just say it the way it is. While sometimes it's also good because you don't want to offend someone, so you rephrase it like you would do it in America. So, based on that idea, I feel like it's difficult to uphold your own values, cultural values, but also switch completely to a different one, different viewpoint, and adjust yourself completely outside of your natural, let's call it job setting, and open up to your friends about how you want to be treated and how you want to communicate, because your communication style is completely different than theirs.
That's, I think, one element about perhaps my culture is that there's a heightened understanding of the exchange of pleasantries. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of, we beat around the bush a lot, and we use a lot of pet names and certain terminology that showcases a level of affection and acceptance that's not necessarily true. So, for example, if I meet a person, a guy, and we have a conversation, or we have something pretty brief, short encounter, we use the word habibi a lot, which literally translates to my lover.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we had this conversation, but go ahead.
Did we really?
Not the same one, but habibi is used in German rap.
Oh.
So much.
Gosh.
It's one of the same things. You remember when we had like how to greet someone?
Right.
Salam alaikum. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's true. No, that's true. So that's the thing. Like you use a lot of words and terminology that is supposed to that becomes so diluted that you don't really know whether it's genuine or not, because we haven't had an experience of brutal honesty or flagrant behavior. One of my professors likes to use the word flagrant, which is, I think, French, which translates to flagrant, quite blunt. We don't really have that. We always mask or sugarcoat our communication between one another, which truly hides or obscures the intentions or the true the message, the true message that you're trying to convey. And that's just a problem. And it's good, I think it's good to have a balance. It's good to be honest and blunt. But, sometimes it's good to sort of have a little bit of an exchange of pleasantries that's just so Arab-like, for lack of a better word. You know what I mean?
Do you think it always leads to miscommunication?
Maybe not always, but in a lot of situations it would, because one is not being honest or genuine. I think I personally don't like it when people call me Habibi. I don't, because
I'm just thinking every single time I'm gonna see you, I'm gonna just shout across the whole campus, Habibi.
I'm gonna run the other way. I'm gonna I don't know this person. But it's not, I don't really like it because I think we've diluted the word so much that it lost its meaning. And I like giving words justice or expressions justice. I want, if I say that someone is a friend of mine, or if I say that's a best friend, or if I say that's my special someone, like I truly mean it when I say it, I wouldn't use that in a loose and quick way as much as, these people would when they use the word Habibi. It's just, it lost its meaning. And when you keep using it a lot, and when you use other words a lot that express a level of affection that's not necessarily true, you're essentially hiding the true nature of or obscuring the relationship or the true nature of that communication. And that might not always, to your question, lead to trouble or a sort of collapse, but it creates problems. It creates a rift, because it's like, well, where are we? Like, where do we stand? What are we? So that's why I prefer more honesty and less of this sort of less of that exchange that's not real.
Do you feel the same way about nicknames? Because I feel like I tend to not introduce myself with my nicknames. I have like a ton of them. For some reason, people just try to shorten up my name because it's too long, for everyone's opinion. The thing is, though, I realized when I introduce myself with a nickname, people will only use my nickname. Or what I don't like is when people switch to my nickname without knowing me on a personal basis. It's I've experienced this in college in Germany when a girl she addressed me as Vero, just like my first 4 letters, and in Germany a lot of people call me just Vero. The nickname established itself through playing volleyball all the time, and when a ball is like flying across the court, you don't want to shout the whole name, so people just start calling me Vero because it's shorter and faster, to the point, and when I need to make a point, people just would use my nickname. And I liked it. I didn't mind it, you know. Well, some people called me V. There were so many nicknames, a ton of them. But it's strange when she walked up to me and she called me Vero. Like we're on a personal good basis, like we know each other outside of school, but we weren't even on good terms. And that just threw me off, and I was like, I don't want anyone to use my nickname without actually being on this basis with me, because a nickname is a personal relationship for me almost. Like someone who is a close friend to me that knows me for long enough and that I'm okay with using my nickname. She didn't ask me, she just used it. So I'm really curious, would you say a nickname is a thing that also might be like indirect communication, or is it a different case completely?
Yeah. Well, I do want to first off say that this is one thing that I maybe don't have a strong attachment to, the idea of the nickname. We use a lot of nicknames, of course. I mean, I think in most cultures, nicknames are I guess commonly used. I think for me, when I do have different variations of my name. People call me different things. Obviously, they would be considered nicknames. My mom will probably call me Abuda. My friends would probably call me Abdu. Here in the U.S., some people call me Abdul. Actually, my professor, he would call me Abdul. The one that I assist at the department. But I never really found. I might be like, huh? When someone calls me by my nickname without knowing me personally, right? That might trigger a reaction. But I wouldn't, this is where I probably wouldn't feel offended. Because I think my lack of attachment to that idea of how, I guess, how personal I consider my name is or my nicknames are. But I think the more you get to know a person, the more you're sort of, the more maybe a person gets to know you, the more you reveal, and the more you are comfortable with them. One doesn't have to take things, just take it slow. You don't have to be too quick. But when it essentially goes back to nicknames, I, generally speaking, I don't think I've ever called anyone or anybody by their nickname. I love using people's names. Like, I really think, even when I text people or when I reach out to people, I use their name, and I think addressing a person with their name, I think, like, it triggers something. Like, especially if you text someone, like, you will notice a difference. Like, if someone texts you with, hey, do you want to hang out tonight? And if someone texts you with someone else texts you and says, hey, Veronica, do you want to hang out tonight? It's so different. And I'm sure even if even if these are two of your closest friends, one message seems to be more personal. The other can be too generic. Even when you look at your email and you have like a spam on your spam folder, like, you notice how the greeting starts with hey or hi. Like, immediately you're like, yeah, that person is like, that's definitely a spam. But when it's like, when you see your name at first, like the first thing you see, your name, it says, hi, Veronica, or dear Veronica, like, you notice that, okay, that specific part immediately established something intimate or something personal. And you were more inclined to read through that email than perhaps the one that didn't include your name, because you would have, maybe you have questions or you have concerns. But that's just, I stretched out a little bit and I digress and used the email example. But the point that I'm trying to get at is I don't really have a lot of, like, a strong attachment to, I guess, nicknames. I would be surprised, obviously, if someone called me, use a nickname to refer to me without knowing me personally. But at the same time, I never felt that sort of offended me. But again, I really like making my communications with people more personal. And these are the subtle things, I might not use their nickname, but I would use their name. And so I think, it's one of the things that people, it's one of your it's one of those things about your identity. Name is one of them. And so if that is not acknowledged, it's like you've practically did not acknowledge one of the main sort of components of who a person is. So that's one level of acknowledgement, using their name. And that's something I learned over the years, I receive a lot of, I communicate with a lot of people. I receive a lot of texts. And you do notice a difference with the different messages that you receive, where one feels more personal, where I see my name, and the other ones where, and I'm sure it's not intentional, but if I were to just, from the outside looking in, if I just post all these messages, I can see the ones that stand out because they felt more personal and they included my name. But I don't know. I don't know if that's something you kind of maybe I'm painting a rough sketch here that maybe you haven't put a lot of thought into, but I'd love to hear sort of where you stand on it.
So many questions. I'm just keep noting it
Writing down
down
questions.
And then you answered one of them. I was thinking of identity in the way of a name can be attached to identity, right? We recall, if someone calls our name, we react. If someone says something that is similar to our name, we also react, right? Subconsciously, even if we're completely focused on one discussion, we hear it and we just start paying attention, right? So what I'm curious, would you say it holds a huge a huge amount of, how do you phrase that? Would you say your name is so important for your own identity, or it's something that just is a supplementary, something that you just add to your identity as a name?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
It just, sorry, if I have one last thing, so you understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
Bad example, but we were talking about Hitler and so on. If you think about concentration camps, really heavy topic. What they did, and you probably know that, they gave people numbers instead of names. So they stripped down their identity as being having an identity by giving them just a number that should,
Yeah, I have an example to mention about. Okay.
Go ahead.
That's so cool. No, sorry. The example that I'm going to mention, because it relates to what you're saying, but I got a little too excited here because I had an example. Okay. So, there's a movie about assassins that's called it's called Hitman, and essentially what this agency does is that it takes all of these orphans and they train them. They put them through this rigorous, training path in order to become human machines and are able to assassinate people and perform the duties of this agency. But the catch is, or so maybe it wouldn't be considered a catch, but the part that relates to what you were saying and the historical example is that all of these orphans are given numbers, not names. And you have Agent 47, or you have Agent 45, or Agent 46. They're giving numbers. And so names, even when you stereotypically, when you think of a particular name, names create an image in our mind, an identity, or a person, like Greg. You might think of, or Gary. There's a stereotype of Gary, Indiana, the lame duck, the couch potato.
Yes.
Right? So names are powerful, and I think they do play an important role in a person's identity or who a person is. Because I do think that maybe if someone did not know me as Abdullah, or the example of the time when I was known as a John, which is a different story that we can get into later. But anyways, there's an entirely different. I think the perspective sort of shifts. Even when someone, if someone has exposure to an Arabic culture and they hear my name, say an American person, they hear my name, they have a level of exposure to Arabic culture, that would sort of shape, perhaps in the beginning, how they think of me. Because that name carries a particular weight. It not only carries me as a person, but it carries the culture and the different facets of that culture from which the name comes from. And so I think, to me, And that's when I admit that I forgot your question, but but I think names. I guess your question was whether or not they're important to one's identity, right?
And if it's something that is the main thing about identity almost, or it's something just adds to your identity.
Yeah, an accessory or
yes.
complementary. I see
Yes,
what you're saying.
thank you.
I truly think they can be both, because you didn't choose your name unless at some point of your life you chose to identify as something or the other. But you are given that name from the beginning, from the day you were born. You're given that name. And that's, I think, one of the most consistent elements of who you are or what you are. And so it has accompanied you for almost every stage of your life. And if that wasn't a core component of who you are, then I would be interested to know what other components that accompanied you for almost every part of your life that you sort of maybe associate with or make up a part of who you are. I think your name has been or always will be a consistent part of who you are. And it carries a weight. It carries not just the person that you are, but perhaps the culture that you come from and the meaning to it, because some names have meanings. Like my name would be translated as, roughly speaking, the servant of God, and that that has a meaning to it. So it carries that meaning. It carries the culture from which it comes from. It carries the person who associates with that name. So it can be quite an important element of who you are, but it could also be considered an accessory if you are given a name that you do not necessarily agree with or you don't have maybe a strong attachment to. Because some people are given names that at some point in their lives they decide to discard and adopt a different one. So it's like, but you see people adopt names, right? And so that means they are important. I don't know. It's an interesting question that I don't think I've given a lot of thought about.
My grandma's name was Yevdakia, what is a really old-fashioned Russian name. But we never called her Yevdakia, and she didn't like the name either. Every single time we would call her Lucia. And Lucia is a different name. And so every single time when I would greet her, I'm like, Baba Lucia. So babushka is the grandma, and baba is just usually it can be also in an offending way, you can actually offend someone, but if it's someone in your family who's I don't know, a grandchild, saying that, it's okay. It's actually acceptable. And people do it all the time. And so we never use her full name. And I was just thinking about that, as well as if you when you have a middle name and another name, and you have 5 names, I don't know,
right,
based on your grandma and grandpa and who else.
Hyphenated names,
yes.
Middle names.
It's so interesting how a tradition or a family background can be carried into your own name. We in Germany we don't have middle names at all. We don't use middle names. It's so strange, but Americans do. And I remember my host family back then, when my host mom was pregnant, they were deciding on a name, and they couldn't decide because the initials would be so significant too on how people perceive you. So just AJ or AD, or it's just the first and 2 initials based on your middle name and your first name, hold also huge significance in your culture too. But then in other cultures, you just disregard it completely. I'm written Veronica with a K, what is basically just done because my parents wanted something more universal. A C in Russian is an S if you write this way. So writing it with a K makes it actually look more Russian, but at the same time it's also used in other countries, and you would not misunderstand the name, right? And we in Russia, for instance, you are not on first name basis most of the time. So what we have, I don't know if I ever mentioned to you, we have a word called отчество, what is based on your dad's first name, and you create an отчество, what is not a it's not a last name, it's not a first name, it's a special name that you get, let's go this way, based on your dad's name, and if you're female or male, you attach a specific ending to it. So even though I cannot roll the R, my dad's name is Andrei, and I would be considered Andreevna. Vna is the Russian, like the like that would be like my отчество, and because I'm female, you attach Vna. Andreevich would be like the actual like male version of it. And people in school would call you only based on this name. They actually never use or rarely use you like your first name. And I've seen the same thing, I think it's in Japanese culture, where first names are so intimate. And that's where we come back to the topic with nicknames and calling someone Habibi and so on. I think people specifically don't use actually your first name. They use your last name more because it holds such a bigger value in how close you are to someone using certain names, or like calling someone, I think it's in Korean, like aunt or uncle, and then you have certain like names depending on how old you are in comparison to your own age, and then you could adjust it and call someone like in a specific way because of your age gap that you have. I hope that's not too confusing, but
no,
yeah.
I have a couple of things, if you may, to say about this. One thing is, I'd love to maybe take it back to culture here. One thing that I want to share is that back home in Libya, when first off you have this idea of a hyphenated name, which I'm sure you're aware of as well. You hear, for example, a person called Mary Beth, like two names hyphenated, or Mary Jane, or these types of things. And we also have that, and we also have a middle name, though it is the father's name. And I, as an Abdullah, my full name would be Abdullah Nabil Najjar. So my first name is Abdullah. My middle name is actually my father's name, and obviously my last name is Najjar. So even my sister, that name doesn't switch based off of the gender of the person or the son or the daughter. Like, it stays the same. So my sister, Khadija Nabil Najjar, the same middle name remains consistent. And that's interesting, because I never knew that in the United States people had middle names that were actually their name. You have John, say it's a John Smith, you have a middle name in there, John Taylor Smith, for example. Like, that middle name is still their name. It's not somebody else's. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing that, and I love that you brought up the subject of names, because, oh my goodness, yesterday, when I was recording my podcast, when I was talking to this guy, my good friend Mick Mulroy, about Stoicism, one thing that I brought up was that was the early Stoic. His name was Epictetus, I believe, and one thing that I talked about a couple of things about Epictetus, where he's what his belief systems are, and what he thinks about external events and the control that we have over these things, and what it's like to be a Stoic. And then when my friend Mick started talking about Epictetus, one thing he mentioned that I didn't know was that we don't actually know the real name of Epictetus. Like, he was born a slave, and he was, I think that name, translates to slave. And we don't really, he never adopted a different name. Like, we don't really know his actual name. And that idea of being born perhaps nameless, or acquiring a name, or perhaps shedding your own name, the consistent variable here is still the name, which means it does hold a tremendous amount of weight. And it has a lot of defining characteristics that are stereotypical. And one other thing that I want to mention, and then maybe you can tell me more about what you think about this, is that in one book that I was reading that's called A Mercy, it's set in the early colonial America in the 16th century, I believe, or 17th century. You have a family deciding to adopt, at the time, a very religious Presbyterian family, deciding to adopt a Native American girl. And in one of the scenes, you see how this family is trying to wipe out the identity of that Native American girl. And one of the things that they do is that they give her a name, a different name than the one that she's born with, which means that, again, names just carry tremendous weight, and they give an impression of a person. Like, we have a lot of images get conjured up in our minds when we hear a particular name. And I remember sharing a joke with you about your name, Veronica, and what sort of, movie that I remember and scene, and it's a funny, hilarious scene of a girl named Veronica.
Yeah.
And so, you hear that name and something is triggered in your mind. Just, you can't. There are certain people you can't really, whose names you just can't replace. Where you're like, I sometimes have that experience where I meet a person who leaves tremendous impact on me. They go by a particular name, and then I meet another person who shares that very exact same name, but they don't have, where I'm like, no, you're not a John, or no, you're not a Lucy. There's only one Lucy, It's like, it's interesting. I don't know.
It's the same way when you meet someone you had a bad experience with, and you internally already judge the other person based on their name. You're like, oh, I didn't like Victoria. This Victoria is going to be the same. So maybe paying attention to how we judge and perceive people based on the name is really important. And it's also really like crazy because it's your parents that give you the name that will determine your whole life. There's even a thing about maybe a study that was super interesting. It's concerning more last names. But since in Germany in school, we really often go more by last name than by first name, maybe elementary school you would switch, but the older you get, the more people pay attention to your last name. And there's a study done, I'm not sure what university you did it, but it's depending on where you are on the list, like on the roster, and where your last name is located, you can see who will get better grades, statistically speaking. So if you're on the top, I think 10 placements in the class list, you will probably get better grades than someone who's on the bottom of the list, because we associate good grades and good achievements with people that have last names in the top of a roster. And so I'm not saying that that's how I got into NC State. I do have a really first 10 people roster name. But it's the same. It goes the same way if you would switch to your first name, and my first name is like completely on the bottom. You again have the same thing, and you most likely it's the same thing. There's a bias. I just talked about it with my friend the other day, where the first thing you hear and the last thing you hear are the things that stay with you. There's a specific bias of what you remember based on the conversation, based on the name. And so if your name is in the beginning of the roster and in the end, you most likely will remember these people in your class than someone who's in between. So I'm so sorry if you're in between. I'm sorry to tell you.
to the in-betweens.
Yes. But that's just a thought that came and crossed my mind.
But I think, I think that that's even how, in general, how we orient our lives. We like to have maybe for simplicity's sake, we always look at things in terms of a binary, right? Ones and zeros, top, bottom, right, left,
good,
north,
bad,
south. Yeah, good,
black,
bad.
white.
Yeah, so top of the list, bottom of the list. We don't look at the ones in the middle. But there's always a gray area, but we rarely, see that gray area. And so that's why all of that nuance gets forgotten. And if you apply it back to the example of the roster, all of those middle names, the names in the middle, are forgotten. And, even with like, it's interesting that you mentioned a conversation and how, maybe we remember the beginning and the end, because it's like all of that nuance is oftentimes not captured because I guess human beings like simplicity. Even though we're complex, I'm sure our minds are complex, but we always look at things from a very binary perspective, right? Good or bad, north or south, east or west, one or two, liberal or conservative.
And maybe that's the reason why nicknames are also so alluring to us.
Mm-hmm.
Having a shorter name, something you can say much faster, simpler. The simpler, the better. Maybe that's also the reason why we do it. Like, maybe there isn't even it feels like simpler is better.
Gosh,
like
I didn't think about that.
The simpler way in life is easier and better. If I can actually skip the workout and get my abs without even doing anything, yes, I would take this path.
Right.
Your brain is almost like, there's this thing where your brain tries to do everything and cans to not do anything. So you being on the couch is a normal stage of your brain being happy. You being a couch potato is your brain being happy. The moment you actually need to get up and get off your phone is when your brain hates you right now. And it's like, why are we doing that? This is a safe place, being a couch potato. So we try to simplify everything from like our names, our identity, putting people into boxes. There are so many things and layers, I think, where simplicity comes into play. But I think just names are really interesting in the backgrounds, and I think we could even have a second episode about names.
Oh, I'm sure. I can't believe that was, it's like you never really think about these things. I never, like, your questions put me in a position where I was like, man, this is actually some pretty interesting stuff that I never thought about. But I already had maybe a few ideas in mind, but, names are just such an interesting subject. Origin of names, why we use the names that we use, and why, like, even, I'm sure you told me about this and we talked about it before, how even in certain resumes, when you look at the name, it's very telling, right, of maybe where the person is from, who they are, whether or not they should be accepted, or whether or not. Yeah.
My dad's friend, or like from work, he actually decided to accept his wife's last name instead of going the traditional path, because she had a Dutch last name, and really often Dutch companies for some reason hire you if you have a Dutch last name. And so he gave up his German last name to have a Dutch last name to get accepted, and he got the job because of his last name. It's so crazy if you think this way, that a last name, a name can give you, like, you don't even need a picture. You don't need to put the thing where you say a resume shouldn't have a picture and then you're actually like not going to judge the person. You will. Because a name can give you like an image of what the person could be.
Exactly. And if we were to play a game right now, you and I, if I were to say, if I were to give you the name Arthur, and if I were to give you the name Gary, you probably would have very different images in your mind of who Arthur is and who Gary is.
Arthur, I think of like Great Britain for some reason, or like like with the sword. What's the story about Arthur the
sword? Yeah.
Yes.
They do a lot of theater plays about it.
And then Gary, for some reason, I think of someone. Typical American, but not typical American. Or like maybe even, okay, I don't want to say typical American anymore, but I wanted to say something like, I was thinking of like farmlands.
Exactly. You see that image, right? We're guilty of it as well. It's not the ones at the HR department.
He's like exposing me. No, I'm joking.
No, I'm also guilty of it. I'm honestly, yes, names are powerful. And if I were presented with, if you told me you had two friends, you had an Arthur and a Gary, I would probably, in my mind, and I'm guilty of it, I'd probably be thinking of an Arthur as someone who maybe more refined, just...
Yes, and Gary the opposite.
Exactly.
So you do the same thing. And so that's, my dear listeners, is why we double check and meet people before we judge them based on the name, or we forget it. I forget names all the time. That's even worse. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like I just strip them down their identity without even wanting it. I just forget names and I can't remember and recall them. Not because I don't try, it's just super difficult. And certain names I can't even properly, comprehend, understand, even like remember because I've never heard them before. And I'm
Right.
like, how do you pronounce this name? Like, I don't even know how to remember. I literally have lists with names in it where I keep track of names. But basically,
Yeah.
we probably have to do a second episode
We have
about
to.
names and not like identity. But I think it was a nice kind of touch on names. And if you ever see an application and you feel like this name represents something that you've seen, and probably a lot of people pick names based on TV shows, but or like famous people, please just be mindful that this person might be completely different Gary.
Or a completely different Arthur.
Yes, than you anticipated. So thank you so much for being on my podcast. And I hope we're going to tell the John story next time. So,
Oh, yes. It's going to be hilarious. Thank you for having me. I really
Yes.
enjoyed this, Veronica.
Thank you so much, too. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend, wonderful start into the week, and hear from you guys or from me soon. Bye-bye.